Scripture reading this morning will be from Hebrews, the 4th chapter, verses 12 and 13. Hebrews 4, verses 12 and 13. For the word of God is quick and powerful, and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the dividing asunder of soul and spirit, and of the joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. Neither is there any creature that is not manifest in his sight, but all things are naked and open unto the eyes of him with whom we have to do.
Is that on? Everybody here good? Good? Good. Well, this morning, I appreciate the prayer and appreciate the opportunity to be able to stand before the congregation once again. This lesson, and I don't know how many of you have seen in the bulletin, but this lesson has come about from 2 or 3, maybe 4 different things, trying to understand people, understand Christians. And it just is sometimes beyond my ability to understand. But I think sometimes we, as Christians, take advantage of what we do have and forget everything that's been given to us as Christians. And the things that have gone over in the last 3 or 4 years at this congregation makes me wonder. And then a thing came up in the last month or so with an individual that I work with having a lot of problems. I said I wasn't going to let this bother me, but it does. Anyway. But in trying to help people what you can and make them realize what you have. They may come to you, and that's what this individual did, came to me, asking about things, and I found out later what the root problem was. But a construction worker coming to you crying like a baby. But anyway, found out a lot of it was to do with the passing of his father a few years ago. And then also his trying to take care of himself. He decided meth was what would take care of him. But finally, we talked to his mother and his brothers, and they got him to a Valor Vista, if you know what Valor Vista is. So hopefully that will take care of him. But and in talking with him, I told him, because he kept coming to me about it and stuff. I said that what you need is some hope. And I said, go home and read Psalms 23. I said, they leave that in hotel rooms and everything else for those that have nothing or feel like they have nothing. And he did, and I don't know if it helped or not, but hopefully it helped bring him to the point was, hey, there's something wrong. I need to get it taken care of. And he went voluntarily. So hopefully, maybe it was his mother that finally talked him into it too. I don't know. But anyway, that's what helped bring about this lesson. And in I guess I need to get my stuff going before I get carried away here. Sorry, Gene. My God is everywhere. And sometimes we don't realize that God is everywhere. And he's being seen through us as Christians. And hopefully that's what we're portraying in our lives, in our talk, in our actions. And if we have the opportunity, maybe give somebody a little bit of hope or explain the hope that is within us that, hey, this is maybe a rough life, but the end is great. Just like the song you sang there, Jeff. I don't know how you come up, that's the same thing I was singing, but good job. But my God is everywhere. And as we've been studying on Wednesday nights throughout the Psalms, which is a great study, I come across, and it was in a song that I think Rich led a couple weeks ago, that this Psalms, and this is Psalms 139, and this come about on one of the songs that I think he led it, one of the verses underneath. And I got to looking at it and said, there's a good lesson right there. And it talks about, as we've seen in this, as you'll see as we study throughout today, this psalm, it gives those three things that we talked about, omnipresent, omniscience, and omnipotence, we see in this, and how great our God is, and that He is everywhere, and there's nowhere He's not. And that's what David sing, but I want us to put ourselves in this place of this writer, as we are writing it, and see how deep we can learn, how much we can learn from this study. But the first part of this chapter, the whole chapter, the theme is what I said, God's all knowledge, all ever-present, and all-powerful is the theme of this psalm. And I think as we look into it, we'll see, and it may help us grow and become stronger and realize what we do have. Because you always people talk about, they don't really realize what they do have. And sometimes Christians, I think, get caught up in that. We really don't realize what we have and the blessings and the spiritual blessings we have through Christ. But in the first 6 verses kind of deals with this knowledge, this omniscience, all knowledge. And as we read it, and just think about, put yourself in this, and as you're talking to the Lord in a prayer or just as you're meditating. It says, "O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You understand my thought from afar. You scrutinize my path and my lying down and are intimately acquainted with all my ways." Think of that in a minute. He says, you have searched me and known me. Is there a part of you that He does not know? Is there a part of any human being that He does not know? And that is so much far above my head to even be able to understand how many million people are in the world today. And everyone could say this. You know me. You've searched me. You know everything about me. You know me intimately. You know my ever thoughts. And as we get down a little further, you even know before I even speak what I'm going to say. How can God do this? We don't understand. Then part of that, He says, you know when I sit down, you know when I rise up. He knows your every action. And you sit down, rise up. It's kind of a complete difference. But He uses it kind of as a saying that God knows everything. He's in control of everything. He knows everything about us individually. Take everybody else, however many, I didn't even look up how many million people are in the world. But you're one person. And He knows when you sit down. He knows when you rise up. Or even think of it when you lay down at night and when you rise early in the morning. He knows that. He says you scrutinize my path and my lying down. So what does that mean? Scrutinize is examine or inspect closely and thoroughly. So when you scrutinize something, you're looking into it. See if it's doing the actions that are required. If you're following His commandments, He's looking into that. He sees that. And you can remember the Israelites. Ezekiel talks about it. As you go back and read the book of Ezekiel, he says, "O son of man, do you see what they're doing? They're pretending to worship me, but they go into the dark rooms where they don't think I can see." So He examines whatever we do. And he said, "You are intimately acquainted with all my ways." And you think about intimately, it means way that involves detailed knowledge. In other words, his knowledge is complete of what we do, what we say. And that should scare us to death. Because Alan don't know what I'm thinking, Jeff don't know what I'm thinking about, anybody else don't know what I'm thinking about. But the Lord knows, and he's the one that counts. He knows if my heart is true, or if I'm just putting on a pretense amongst people that I'm around. He knows my heart. Then you go into the next few verses there. It says, even before there is a word on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it all. You have enclosed behind me and before me, and you laid your hands upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is too high. I cannot attain to it. Think about that just a minute there. Once again, we go back to, he says, you know my every word. You know my every thought. He knows what I'm going to say before I even say it. Before that word is even on my tongue. So what's that mean? He knows my thoughts. Even though sometimes I don't control my tongue, he knows what I'm going to say. He probably has a boot ready to boot me for saying it. But he says, you enclosed behind me and before me, laid your hand upon me. In other words, he has completely surrounded you. You're within his arms. And that reminds me of Jesus talking about the children of Israel. Said, like a hen would want to take you in. Take you to little, we used to call them biddies, the little biddies up underneath her wings, and hide them from any danger. That's what it reminds me of when he says, I'm behind you and before you. In other words, I'm here, your protection. I'm looking out for you. But he does that for all mankind that will take that advantage of him encompassing them. And he talks about, such as your knowledge is too wonderful for me. In other words, it's beyond what I can even imagine. My knowledge here, his knowledge is tall as the ceiling. And we'll get in a little bit later about his thoughts. But it said that knowledge is so wonderful, I can't even imagine. Because you know everything. Remember, Jesus said, he says he even knows the many hairs that are upon your head, which some of us don't have a whole lot, but he knows it. He says it's so high that I can't even attain to it. I can't even grasp it. I can't even grasp the understanding of it. The next part of the verses that he talks about in this chapter is his presence, his omnipresence. And we think about presence is his everywhere. There's no place that he's not. And I thought some of these things that David writes down is through the Holy Spirit. It's very interesting in these things. Sometimes we don't even think about these things in verses 7 through 12. In verse 7 it says, where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol or hell, behold, you are there. If I take wings of the dawn, if I dwell in the remotest parts of the sea, even there your hand will lead me, and your right hand will lay hold of me. Now go back and think about this a minute. Think about this verse says, where can I go that your spirit is not? Where can I flee? Is there any place I can hide? We can think of some of the Old Testament characters that tried to hide. Remember Jonah? He thought he could hide. He thought he could go to another city and be hid. Didn't work out too well for him. But you need to go read Jonah, the 2nd chapter, in his prayer after he realized that he wasn't very smart. That what he had done, he had not escaped God, but he humbled himself. And you need to read that prayer. It's a very beautiful prayer there in the 2nd chapter of Jonah. He tried to flee from the presence of God because he didn't want to do what God wanted him to do. He thought, well, if I do this, God will forget about it, and maybe he won't convict the city of Nineveh. But we see as the story goes on that he did convict them, and they repented of their wrong ways. He says, in the next verse, he talks about between heaven and hell. The greatest distance there is, you can go to hell or you can go to heaven, but his presence is there. Is he in hell? No, he's one that has established it for the punishment of those that are disobedient. But you cannot hide from him there. You can go to heaven, you cannot hide from him. He's there. He's a part of it. He is it. And he goes on and talks about the dawn. If you go back to the eastern sky when the sun rises, if you're down below the sun, he'll know where you're at. Go to the deepest part of the sea, and we've seen that looking for the Titanic a few months back, how deep that was. You still wouldn't be able to hide from him. And why is that? Because he has created everything. And he has knowledge of everything that he has created, even down to the smallest little ant or the greatest mountain that he created. He said, even if I'm in those places, what will you do? You'll still lead me out. You'll still take me by the hand and lead me. You have that much care for your saints that no matter where they're at, here in the United States or in the remotest part of Australia, he will take care of his saints. He will lead them. He has written down what man needs. He says, and your right hand will lay hold of me. In other words, like I said, he'll care for you. He'll put you under his wing and take you on. And as you go into the last two verses of that part, it says, if I say, surely the darkness will overwhelm me and the light around me will be night, even the darkness is not dark to you, and the night is bright as the day. Darkness and light are alike to you. So God can see through the darkness. There is no darkness in him. He is all light, as 1 John talks about. So we see that there's nothing that God does not know. There's no place that God is not. He said even darkness and light, there's no difference in it to him because he can see through it all. And he's the one that spoke light into existence. And as we go on and see, he said that the night is as bright as the day. So we can imagine what that means. We can see the darkest of dark when it's the darkest just before the sun comes up. There's no difference to him. Then we can look at, in the next few verses, about his power, how great his power is in the next few verses. God's omnipotence, in other words, his power. I thought I might have had these all scrambled around because I didn't put my PowerPoint on, didn't put it on PowerPoint until this morning. I had it on my notes, but I thought but I didn't. I'm lucky. I was looking through the computer a little bit ago to make sure I did. But we see this, it talks about his power, what he knows, what he can do, and what he has done. In verse 13 through 18, it says, for you have formed my inner parts. You have woven me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. What has he done? He's created man. He's created animal life. He has created insect life. He's created the land that we live in, the birds, everything in it he has created. But he goes back to the man. He says, you have formed me, my inward parts. In other words, he knows every little part, every little cell. He knows. He said, you wove me. In other words, you created me inside of my mother's womb. From the time of conception on, you have created me. So I'm going to give thanks because your works are wonderful. There's nothing wrong with your works. They're all powerful. They're all consistent with your creation. And he says, my soul knows very well. In other words, God created us. He breathed into us the breath of life. He gave us a soul. And through our soul and through our knowledge, we learn how great this God is that cares for his saints. Moving on, it says, my frame is not hidden from you. When I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth, your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were written the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them. And how beautiful is that? Do you understand it? Can you fathom how he does know that? It says, my frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret. In other words, he knew us upon that conception. He knew how we were. He said, it's so much skill above what I know, above what we know. And as we're thinking about this and as we're putting ourselves in David's place and saying these things, do we understand him, how great our God is, and that he is everywhere? said, your eyes have even seen my unformed body. It is even before that. And here's what is a hard one. And your days are all written in a book. He said, the days that were ordained for me, yet, as they were not one of them yet. In other words, even before we were, he knew our days. He knows our days are written in a book, how long we're going to be here. Now, to me, I can't even imagine how that is. That makes you want to say, how many days I got left? Quite a few or very few. But he knows. And that's what's so great about him, about his thinking for us. And as we get just a little bit further, his thoughts, how powerful they are, how much above us they are. And Isaiah in the 55th chapter talks about it. It says, your thoughts are not my thoughts, your ways are not my ways. He says, how precious are your thoughts to me, O God, how vast is the sum of them. If I should count them, it would outnumber the sand. When I wake, I'm still with you. So even sleep, wake, we're still with him. And it says, how can I count those wonderful things, your thoughts, how precious they are? He said, they will outnumber the sand. We can't even imagine how the sand is. It kind of reminds me back when John talked about Jesus. They wrote down a few things that we needed to believe, but if they wrote down everything that Jesus done, they would fill the whole earth and beyond. So that's how great and precious God's thoughts are. There's so many of them that we can't even imagine the number. Then he wants to bring us up to a point where, hey, there is some enemies. This ain't all greatness that you live and you are glorifying God and God's being seen through you. But there's going to be some times of trials and temptations that will come upon you. And he considered them enemies of God. In what way they're enemies of God? Well, he talks about, he said, oh, that you slay the wicked. In other words, the ones of disobedience. Oh, God, depart from me, therefore, men of bloodshed. For they speak against you wickedly, and your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with the utmost hatred. They have become my enemies. And is it the individuals that he's talking about? He's just talking about the sin that they're in, the wickedness that they're in. He hates that. And we also should hate the sin that people are in, but love the people. And try to help them and try to bring them to God before it's too late. James talks about in the 4th chapter, and about the 4th verse, he talks about a friend of the world is what? A friend of God? No. A friend of the world is an enemy of God. So we need to think about what's talking about a friend of the world. Well, as the Israelites, I'm going to do what is against God behind these closed doors so nobody sees me. But I'm going to be out in the open with everything else. And then also being a friend of the world, you're going to do things of the world that you hope people accept you, instead of being separate and apart from the world. Someone that stands out. Hey, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Because I have a master that's better and above this world. One that I want to follow. One that's going to reward me in the end if I'm found faithful. So he said, they have become my enemies. Wickedness, friends of the world, have become my enemies. Basically, Satan has become my enemy because he's trying to keep me out of the Lord's kingdom, or trying to get me to get out of the Lord's kingdom. And then finally, it says, God, examine me. We ask God to examine us. These last 2 verses. This is us asking God. It said, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts. And see if there be any hurtful way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way. So he's gone through all these things, the power of God, the knowledge of God, the ever-presence of God, the enemies of God. But in the end, we want God to examine us and find us faithful. We want him If there's any hurtful, any bad thing, help us purge this out of us. Purge the evil out of us. Overcome evil with good. He said, and lead me in the everlasting way. He has established a way for us to follow. He has left us, as Alan, I believe, said in his prayer, all we need for goodness, godliness, pertaining to life and godliness, he has given us. So we can be led in the everlasting way. So in conclusion, I want you to consider these things. Consider not these things only, but myself. Test myself. Examine myself. Am I walking in the way? Am I being uplifting to my fellow brethren? Am I setting an example for those outside of the kingdom, that I may bring more into the kingdom? And ask the Lord, use me as a tool to bring these people in. Be able to give an account of the hope that lies within us. That hope being an everlasting life, the final goal. And then finally, realize that God knows our every thought and deed. Nobody else may know it, but God knows the intentions of our heart. And as we said in the scripture reading, everything's laid naked before him. He sees everything. Nothing from his sight. And we need to remember as Christians that we are living for him. And if you're not a Christian, today would be a day to live for Christ. Live for God. Set the good example for your friends, for your family. That, hey, I'm going to take up the cross and I'm going to follow Jesus. So if you're subject to imitation, won't you come as we stand and sing?